Hello everyone, my name is Zach Herman. Today I get to show you how we have taken advantage of the new service catalog technology in Kubernetes to give object storage as a service. Specifically, we are doing dynamic provisioning of container native storage, object storage, via the service catalog. Now this demo is not focused on the service catalog, but if you are interested, there are plenty of resources out there that will tell you more about the service catalog. Very quickly though, the service catalog is a Kubernetes project that provisions microservices on demand. We use the service catalog to dynamically provision a bucket from a RedHat Gluster Storage cluster for our object storage. So talking about our service, our demo, there are numerous pieces in play that we won't go into in a whole bunch of detail, but I do want to mention that we are actually demoing this today in Openshift versus Kubernetes. Now, the commands that we'll see are identical in Kubernetes and Openshift. And once you have service catalog installed in either environment, the rest is all the same. I'll be using Openshift for two reasons today. Number one, Openshift currently has a flag that sets up the service catalog automatically, and there's no other operation. If you are using Kubernetes, the install of service catalog is fairly trivial. It's just a couple of commands. Normally I use Helm to do it, but right now Openshift does have a slight advantage in terms of starting up the service catalog. The second reason that I'm using Openshift today is we are going to demo the console UI that's only in Openshift to show how you can also, as a developer or just an end user, use the service catalog to create your object storage using a web interface. So with that, let's talk more specifically about this demo. We have right now the RedHat Gluster Storage out in the cloud with a custom S3 broker. The S3 is Amazon's AWS sort of de facto standard. We have the broker that'll act there in the cloud to actually give us the object storage in the form of buckets. Now this could be on-prem, but in this example it's out there and it's already running in the cloud. For our side of things, we are running a local cluster, and that local cluster is already running the service catalog, and we are going to use it to create some storage and then make a fake little web application. In this case, the web application will show pictures from the object storage that we create. I'm going to just have a few steps to create the actual object storage via the command line. The first thing is that we need to actually create the interface to the broker, which will generate a service class, and that service class allows us to actually use the service to instantiate some object storage. So the actual first step will be to instantiate that service class, which will return a bucket of object storage. Once we have that bucket created, we need to bind to that instantiation so that we can actually use it, and that binding will create a secret that we can then take that secret and pass that into the actual application definition, and then create that application in a pod, which will then have access to our bucket of object storage. So with that, we will go ahead and switch over to our presentation today, the actual demo. So I'm going to go to the command line and just simply bring this over. So the first thing I want to show here is that we do have the service catalog running here in Openshift. Again, I'm using Openshift, but at this point, because we have service catalog already installed, we are all the commands will be the same between Kubernetes or Openshift. But understand, as I go through this, Openshift and Kubernetes are identical in terms of our commands that we're using. So I just did a quick showing of what's running, and the service catalog are these two pods that are currently running, and this will handle everything that we do going forward in terms of showing the actual classes. So let me show that real quick. If I just do a quick listing of the actual service brokers that are currently on this machine, we should see a whole list here. In this case, the broker itself is just one item. Let me show the actual service classes that are already installed here. And there we go. We have all these services here that are represented by these service classes that I've just shown. And these are the ones that are already pre-installed on Openshift when you run the service catalog. And this is just a convenience thing that you get these for free on Openshift when you're actually running the catalog. We are going to now add a new service class to this. So I'll go ahead and show that real quick. We have a definition file that defines the actual access to our external broker. So this will be our CNS bucket broker, and it's just a pass-through to the URL that's running the service, the actual broker today. So if you're running your own, the key thing that would change here would be the URL, and it would go to whatever happens to be your location of your object storage. So I'll go ahead and instantiate that. Alright, so now if I go ahead and I show what service brokers are available, you'll see that we now have two, the CNS bucket broker. And then if I show what service classes we have, we'll now see that in this big long list we also have the CNS bucket service. So taking that service, we're going to go ahead and instantiate a bucket. So in order to do that, we will look at our instantiation file, and all this is doing is creating the bucket for us, and really all that we need to define is the actual name. So I have demo bucket 1 here. We'll go ahead and, for the sake of this example, we'll go ahead and change this to some other name. We'll just call it demo bucket 2 because that sounds fun. So now that I have that file defined, I will go ahead and instantiate it. And I am using a specifically defined namespace. If I hadn't done that, it would have defaulted to the default namespace, but I'm going to go ahead and create a test namespace. Alright, and then I'll create my instance. So I've instantiated the bucket. So out on our RedHat Gluster Storage cluster that's out in the cloud, we've created a bucket. Now we have to do a binding so that we can actually have access and use that bucket. To do that, I will simply open up my definition of the binding file, which looks like this. And in terms of this file here, we don't really need to do anything. All this is stating is that we're creating something that's just called credentials in the test namespace, and we are using the CNS bucket instance, which is what I just created in the prior step. So we'll go ahead and run this. and we've created our binding now. So that binding has a secret associated to it, so we can go ahead and look at what that secret entails. So I'll go ahead and just get the secrets that are on this system. I think I've got quite a few, but let's just go ahead and take a look at what we have. Actually, you know what, I'll just limit it by defining which namespace we're using. And there we have the CNS bucket credentials. I can also go ahead and just simply describe that so that you see what's in there. And when I do that, the key thing I want to point out is that we have these 4 items. Contained within these are the credentials and the actual IP endpoint and the bucket name. So those are all contained within these credentials. I don't need to look at these. I don't need to save them, because I'm just going to pass these into the web app that I'm going to generate. So if I just switch tabs here over to my actual web example, I'm going to show you how, now that we've created the bucket storage, we can go ahead and tie that into this web application and use that storage. So I will show you what the definition looks like of this application. So we're creating a pod, and it's pulling an image of a Node.js web application, and it's going to open up port 3000. Now, where things are a little bit different are the actual definition that comes from the credentials. So here I've passed in the bucket name that we generated earlier. It's being passed in via the credentials file, so that it now has that. I also have the endpoint, which is the IP address, and then I have just some other credential information. But all this is now being passed into the application. If I go ahead and create my application, get it up and running, okay, we can do a quick get pods and look at everything that's running now on the system. And you'll now see that we have within our test namespace the demo app that's running, and we've passed in the object storage. So what I can do with this is switch over now to just the running application. Let me go ahead and show that real quick. I've now switched over to the running web application. If we just take a couple of seconds to look at what we have here, I've shown what the actual bucket name is that we're using, and you can see it's the demo bucket 2 that we created earlier. And then I have the endpoint defined here. If we go ahead and go into this, we don't see anything because this is a brand new empty bucket. I can go ahead and browse and add a file. I can then do a put to my object storage that I've created. Once the put's complete, I then do a get, and I load the images, in this case, that have been stored into the bucket. And that is pretty straightforward how you use object storage as a service using the service catalog. Now, I'm going to switch just a little bit and do this whole thing again using the console UI that is part of Openshift. I've now switched over to the Openshift console login page here. I'm going to go ahead and log in, and what we're looking at is the latest version of the console, and I'm looking at what the service catalog gives us if we're running that on our local cluster. And we have a whole list of services that are already here, just as I showed earlier on the command line. Now they're in a very visual sort of way here, since you can see them easily. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now re-add our service broker to this list of service classes. And so around this area right here, we should see our new CNS bucket broker show up. So let me reload the page and we should see that happen. All right, and there it is. So now an admin would have done that prior, and as a developer or end user, and I want to create my new great app, I would come in here, I would simply click on this service, and I would create a new project. We'll just simply call it test project. Okay, sure, test one. All right. The question it's going to ask is, do we need a binding? And yes, we will need a binding just like before. And I'll go ahead and have this created. And there we have the binding and the actual bucket itself have been instantiated automatically for us using the UI. So if I go and I look at what we're running here, we have, this is the services. So that is the CNS bucket service. I will go ahead now and create our web application just as I did before. And to do that, I will simply bring in the same definition that I used last time, and I'm just going to import this right here. There are other ways to do this, but this is just kind of the easiest way at this point. Now, there's one little thing I'm going to change on this file here, and that is I need to update the names to that auto-generated set of credentials. So I'll just go ahead and tweak these values. And once I do that, I can go ahead and create my pod again. So I will go ahead and create that. And the pod was created successfully. So then from here I can go over and look at my pods, and there we go. We have the demo app running now again, and we will go and verify that this is running as we expect. So I will again just show the newly generated application that's running once again. So I will need one thing that we're not viewing right now, and that is I'll have to go and get the IP address for this, which in this case is 31, that's the port number, excuse me. So we'll go over to our other demo page here that we showed earlier, but now we're doing a whole new one. So here we go. We are showing the startup page to this simple web app again. We have an auto-generated bucket. It doesn't have a pretty name since it was just auto-generated, but we still have the same endpoint that we are using now. If we go into that bucket, you'll see again that it's empty, and we will grab a photo and once more upload it, which will do a put to our object storage. Once the put's complete, the application does a get, and it pulls those values down from that object storage. And there you have it. We've now created, using just purely the console in Openshift, we've created some storage. We've fired up a new pod running our example Node.js application, and we've passed in those values from the credential bindings that we created in order to use it within the app. And so now we have an app that's using object storage. And all that was done by simply dynamically taking advantage of dynamic provisioning from the service catalog and our service for object storage that we created. Thank you.